Okay, so this will act as the pilot episode to season 3. And I'm going to start this off with a video that everyone can kind of relate to and be familiar with. So, the idea of this video is to do a video where I share my opinion on the Suicide Squad movie. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to talk about the synopsis of the movie, I'm just going to talk about the goods and the bads and give my final verdict about the film. So yes, this film will contain a lot of spoilers because I want to go into things into great detail. So that will contain obviously spoiler territory once when I talk about these things. And I always think when you're doing a review, like a good review, you should go into great lengths and great details into what the reviewer liked and what he didn't quite like. So that's what I like to do when I am doing a review for a movie. I like to go into great details, and when you're going into great details, of course, there's going to be a great deal of spoilers. So, as I mentioned, this video will contain spoilers. I'm going to start off with the goods, what I liked about the movie, and I'm going to start off with saying that unlike Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the situation with the storyline with Suicide Squad is it's a very straightforward storyline, and that works for its favor because it's not a really bloated storyline. It's not an overcomplicated storyline. It's a very simple storyline, and that works for the narrative. It works well for the characters as well. It's a very simple story, a story that you are very familiar with. An idea of a group of people who are kind of forced to work together to stop a type of threat, and that's the pretty much the storyline that is in Suicide Squad. But it works for the film because it introduces there's a lot of characters going into it in the story, and if it was an overcomplicated story, it would affect the characters because there's a lot of characters in the story, and I'm glad they actually went for a way more straightforward storyline than that of Batman v Superman. Okay, I want to move on to my next point, and my next point is there's quite a few characters and performances that I really enjoyed. I think one of the highlights for me was Harley Quinn's performance by Margot Robbie. She done an absolute fantastic job with her performance. She really nailed the tone of Harley Quinn's character because Harley Quinn can feel awful on the big screen if she was too over the top. But I think Margot Robbie really got the balance right. She wasn't too over the top. She wasn't too cringeworthy. She didn't feel, her performance never felt forced. It felt really natural. She got the crazy just perfect and just on the point of going too over the top. You know what I mean? She done a voice that was that felt right for Harley Quinn's character without being too much of a knockoff of the cartoon series. So she did put her own original turn on this iconic character. Now I wasn't overly fond of her costume. It was okay, but I think it just it needed a bit of work. I was also very surprised by Jai Courtney, who played Captain Boomerang. I've seen him in quite a few things, and he's always been hit and miss. I didn't really like him as Jack McClane in Die Hard 5 or as Kyle Reese in Terminator Genesis. I think he was awful in those, but he was really in his element for this film. I think Jai Courtney, he's an Australian actor, and of course Captain Boomerang is an Australian character, and that really worked for his favour because he was in his element in that sense. The character was Australian, so he was a little bit more of a Australian stereotype, but it worked for Captain Boomerang. Also, he had great comic timing, which was really surprising because whenever I did see Jai Courtney in other films, he's very, stiff and almost robotic in his delivery. But for the case of Captain Boomerang, he was really on point with his humour, and I was very surprised by that. I enjoyed Will Smith's performance as Deadshot. He wasn't, he didn't feel like the character of Deadshot, but Will Smith always has this charisma about him. He's got this persona about him that's just a joy to see on screen. So even though he departed a little bit from the Deadshot character, he still was great in terms of performance wise. He was still fantastic. He was still very much very entertaining whenever he was on screen, and he definitely did get a lot of the screen time, which was great because he knows how to sell a film. So very surprisingly was Jay Hernandez, who played El Diablo. I thought he was a very surprising character, and his character really shined among the squad of the Suicide Squad, because he's very different to the other characters, because he was the metahuman. He was the one who was actually had these abilities about him. Pyrokinesis, that was his ability. And unlike the rest of the Suicide Squad, he didn't want to use his abilities. He has this past about him, and he doesn't want to use his powers because he realizes how powerful he is, and he realizes how dangerous he is. And that was really interesting about his character. And I think Jay Hernandez really delivered in terms of performance. Like, I wasn't really familiar with him as an actor, so I was pleasantly surprised in how much he gave to the character. Violet Davis, who played Amanda Wallers, she was absolutely incredible. We've seen Amanda Wallers in a live action form before. We've seen it in Arrow, and we've seen it also in Smallville. But I think this is where Amanda Waller is just in her element. From the first scene onwards, she's just absolutely perfect. She has that cold, calculated side about her. She has this kind of strict, commanding glare about her. You can just tell she's the type of character you can get whatever she wants, and you can really get that through Violet's performance. It was a great performance, and I definitely think the best performance in the whole film. So moving on from just talking about the characters and cast, I want to talk about the cinematography. I really enjoyed the look of the film. It was great. Really like rich colors. They had a really unique color palette. And one thing I did like is they used a lot of wide shots, which was perfect. I always love when there's wide shots of cities and wide shots of just action and just wider shots of of the set design. All of that was great, and it really kind of helped with the production design of the film. And because all the Suicide Squad members, they all have these all unique colors when it comes to their costume design. When they all come together, it does look absolutely fantastic, and the look of the colors all gelling together in just a wide shot, it looked absolutely fantastic, and I really enjoyed that element of it. I'm gonna have to talk about the soundtrack. You know what? I liked a lot of the songs that they used, and a lot of songs were on point, that they actually really worked for the scenes, and they really added to the scenes. But there was often cases where it wasn't really on point, and it almost felt like there was a playlist of songs, one after another, after another, after another, just playing into each other. And it felt a little forced, and it felt a little off as well. You've seen a few YouTube videos in which someone takes a scene and they put a really iconic song to it, but in certain cases the scene and the song is kind of contrasting each other. This was often the case with Suicide Squad. It was just too many songs playing into scenes, and some of the scenes were kind of quieter scenes, and still would have these more upbeat type songs, which kind of really create quite a contrast. It didn't quite work the way Guardians of the Galaxy played a soundtrack. I think it would have worked better if they timed it better, in such a way they done maybe a song, maybe some the music score, and back into a song. That way it would have worked better. But it's only a minor problem. Now, moving on from that, I do want to talk about the bads about the film, what I didn't quite like. And I gotta say, there's a lot I didn't like about the film compared to what I did like about the film. So I'm going to have to start off by talking about Jared Leto, because if you've seen all the trailers and you've seen all the posters, he himself has been, the frontliner of a lot of the cases. And I remember from the casting when Jared Leto was first casted, I was very excited. I was very excited about him playing the character, and I was always rooting for him, depending his look. I mean, his look isn't great. The tattoos, the grill on his teeth, the fact he's always topless. It doesn't really work that well for a classic Joker look. But I was still always rooting for him. I remember seeing him in the first trailer, and I remember hearing his line delivery, and it was really cool. And it was really interesting, and I thought, well, if he keeps that consistency throughout the film, I'm going to be very impressed by his Joker. But sadly, that wasn't the case. His Joker was very inconsistent. In one scene, he's kind of really intimidating, kind of a darker version of Joker, and there's another scene where he's in a kind of a nightclub situation, and he's talking to Common's character, and he's very, Jim Carrey in a way, and it's really off putting. He's just like, oh, righty then. It kind of had that Ace Ventura feel about him, and it kind of felt really weird for the Joker character. And then there was another scene in which he sounded kind of slightly more high pitched, how he sounded in the trailer, the first trailer. And of course, there is another scene in the film where it's when the Joker has been trying to plan this escape attempt for Harley Quinn's character, and they finally do reunite. And when they do unite, he's talking to her for a bit, and he kind of talks to her in this weird kind of Elvis Presley type voice, and it was just really off-putting. Once again, if he stuck with one voice and stuck consistent with that voice all the way through the movie, I wouldn't mind at all, and that wouldn't have been a problem. But it just felt really kind of weird in that sense. I get it that he's playing the Joker. Maybe the Joker is the type of character who's completely unhinged in the way, in terms of his mannerisms, in terms of his voice as well, but it just didn't quite work. A lot of people, when they do talk, they speak in 3-4 different ways, depending on who they're with. But when it comes to a film narrative, that doesn't work at all. I think one voice has to stay consistent throughout. So moving on from talking about the Joker, I'm going to have to talk about kind of the lead villain of the film, and that of course was Enchantress. And she of course was played by a model by the name of Cara Delevingne. Sorry for the pronunciation. The trailers, they don't hint that she's kind of the main villain. They kind of hint that she may be part of the team. But she is in fact the villain of the story. And, it's a very weird performance because Cara kind of plays her character in 3 ways. She plays her human host, Enchantress human host, which is June Moon. She plays her as a kind of American type character. And she has a relationship with Rick Flag. And the whole subplot is completely blank and empty, and you don't really care about it because you just don't believe this relationship. And then of course she has her Enchantress form, where she kind of looks like the corpse bride on her honeymoon. That's what her look is, and it's not a great look. I get it, they try to make her Enchantress into this real sexy type character, but it just didn't look great. And then of course she has a kind of a final form where she's kind of super Enchantress, and that is one of the hardest things I had to watch in recent cinema. It's just absolutely diabolical, and I don't think it is Cara's fault entirely, because I feel when she's in her final form, her super form, it's like someone is doing a really kind of bad Kate Blanchett impression, and that's what it feels like. But I don't think Cara is entirely to blame for that, because she's only 24, and the voice that is produced by this super Enchantress is really, it's more mature. It's something I don't think she herself done. So if it isn't her doing that voice, then she doesn't deserve the Razzie nomination that people have kind of mentioned that her performance is Razzie worthy. But if it is her performance all the way through, then yes, she definitely deserves a Razzie. I also didn't like the way she actually fights the Suicide Squad. It just felt really off-putting, considering the fact that she has, her brother. He's the super-powered, godlike character who looked awful on screen because he was very CG heavy, and it just didn't look great. It wasn't a great design, and he looked like a normal sized guy, but they kind of stretched out to make him look taller on screen, and it looked really weird actually, and kind of off-putting. Some of the characters were underused and underdeveloped, and were there for the sake of being there. One case is definitely with Killer Croc. A massive missed opportunity with that case, because Killer Croc is a very interesting character, and I love how he's portrayed in the Arkham games. I love his size and his scale, and I love his voice delivery. I think all that is great. But in this case, he's very much normal size. I mean, he's 6 foot, and he kind of has a build to him, but he's not the monstrous Killer Croc we've seen in the comics. Also, I didn't really like his voice. It's like they just put a gain on his voice. He doesn't have that monstrous feel to him. But he doesn't speak a lot either. I mean, there's one scene in the third act of the film where they're all reunited in a bar, and they're talking, and he has this one line. It's probably the only line I do actually remember from Killer Croc, and it just feels like they put a gain to his voice. So he's just like, "Oh, beautiful," but it's like they put a gain on his voice to make it so kind of slightly muzzled. He gets to throw a few guys around the place, but that was really it. He didn't get to do a lot more. I also didn't like Quintana's character. She was really disappointing as well. The worst thing is how she's introduced was one of the worst things I've ever seen in terms of modern cinema. So Rick Flag kind of introduces her to the rest of the squad, and the way it's done is freaking so awful. There's no subtlety whatsoever in how he does it. So it's just like, this is Quintana. Her sword captures people's souls. And you're just like, well, thank you, Captain Backstory. Thank you, Captain Exposition, for that little introduction that's so painfully obvious. Like, there's no sense of subtlety in that writing. And then she gets to cut a few people up. She stays kind of silent throughout the whole film. And she doesn't do a lot else. There is a scene kind of in the trailers where you see her kind of crying into a sword. And in the trailers, it looks like we lose a member of the Suicide Squad. And it looks like a really cool scene. But instead, she's crying into the sword. And it's her dead husband. And her husband's soul or something like that. And of course, the Suicide Squad are kind of like, so what is Quintana doing over there? And of course, Colonel Backstory, Rick Flag's character, he's just like, well, that sword has captured her husband's soul, and that is why she's talking to him over there. She does that before every battle. It was just like, oh my god, what are you doing here? It was just so cringeworthy. It was just such a painful delivery. I didn't actually like a lot of the action sequences. I mean, I think the action sequences could have had a lot of potential, but they were kind of wasted. They don't really play into the characters' strengths. I mean, only a few characters get to really shine. I mean, Deadshot gets a few moments. Harley Quinn gets a few moments. As I mentioned before, Killer Croc gets to throw a few people around, but none of the action really stands out. It's just, there's a lot of shooting, there's some hand-to-hand combat, but none of it is really that iconic. There's no really cool choreography. It's just very plain, very simple. That element I was pretty disappointed with. There was another thing I didn't like was the fact that they always had to kind of shoehorn the fact that they were villains, and had it said so many times throughout the film. Harley Quinn will say, hey, well, don't you realize we're the villains? And then Deadshot will say it, we're the villains. It's said so many times, and we get it to the bad guys, but why is it said so many times in the film? It's just like, we get it, they're the bad guys. Let's move on. There's one thing I didn't also like was, although I liked Deadshot's character, I didn't like the fact that he was portrayed more as an anti-hero rather than a full-on villain. He has his rules, no women, no children. And that I just thought to myself, well, you're a villain. I get that you have a daughter, but what if you're in a situation where that's your target and you're going to make a lot of money over that? It just felt like something that that was Leon's rule in, of course, Leon. And of course, we were all rooting for Leon in that movie, and he had a rule, no women, no children. But yet in the Suicide Squad, Deadshot is considered a villain. So should we consider Leon a villain as well, considering that he plays by those rules? Speaking about Deadshot again, there is another scene where he's with his daughter in the very end of the film, and he's doing maths with his daughter, and it's so cringeworthy how he's trying to explain maths to his daughter, because he's using assassin techniques of explaining maths. So what if this bullet travels this way and this way? And it's just like, are you serious? We get it, you're an assassin, but can't you teach your kid maths without going assassin mode? It was just so cringeworthy to watch. The film would have benefited from being R-rated. I don't think it would have saved the film at all, but having that bit of an R rating really would have helped. I mean, I'm not talking about swear words every so often, but I think just showing how good Deadshot is, it would have been really cool if we seen some really cool, like, kind of shots to the head, shots to the eye, shots, incredible precise shots, shots through a guy's wrist or a palm of his hand. All those little things like that would have been really cool. There's a scene where he's on top of a car and he's shooting out a horde at whatever Enchantress's zombie men are, and it just, we get a sense that he's a real sharpshooter, but it doesn't quite work because he's going against zombies and you don't know where the bullets are traveling to. It would have been cooler if he was going up against a bunch of thugs in this shootout, and you seen where the bullets were landing, and you seen these great headshots and blood splatter here and there. It also would have worked better for Quintana, 'cause, of course, one of the biggest problems with seeing a sword on screen is that a sword is a violent weapon. I mean, it's going to cut up people, it's going to take limbs apart. That should have been against like humans. I mean, that would have been cool, like her cutting up apart a bunch of Joker thugs or something like that. It would have been cool in that sense. But instead, once again, she's cutting up a few zombie characters. Once again, same with Killer Croc. It would have been cool if you seen Killer Croc taking massive chunks out of guys. It would have been cool too. Of course, it wouldn't have redeemed the film that much, but I think it would have added to the film a little bit, just a little bit, a pinch more, because although it still would have had problems with Enchantress and, other things like that, it still would have been a little bit better. You could kind of tell that there was, studio meddling. How the structure of the film works, it kind of feels weird. Like the first act of the film, when they show these character introductions, it feels very flashy, very much like the trailer edit. Lots of graphics on screen, lots of kind of very glittery type visuals. And then, of course, the second act is very, straightforward. And then the third act is very Zack Snyder in terms of filmmaking, lots of slow motion and stuff like that. So the style of filmmaking was very off-putting. The film itself didn't have quite a correct tone. It didn't know exactly what it was doing. And I think that's just the overall wrap of how I feel about the goods and bads of the film. So I'm going to just give my verdict for the film. I'm just going to say this: I was very excited by this film, and I was really had high hopes for the film. I thought they done a great job with the trailers, and I was pretty impressed with most of the casting in the film. And I actually liked the director's choice as well. But I gotta say, I was really disappointed with the end result of the film. I actually I read into the reviews and read into Rotten Tomatoes' opinion, and I said to myself, well, I know I could still enjoy this film. But this is the case where I really feel that the critics were hit the nail on the head with this. It was a very disappointing movie for a lot of reasons, and for that, I'm going to actually have to give the film a 4 out of 10. It's a very disappointing film, and I had such high hopes for it. My best advice for anyone who wants to seek this film is either wait for like it to come out on DVD. Better yet, the best thing you should do is check out Batman: Assault on Arkham. It's a great movie. It's a film about the Suicide Squad, and they have a better character dynamics. The action is way better. Also, the Joker is the lead villain, and he's played by Troy Baker, who does a great job with the performance. I'd advise you to check that out rather than watch Suicide Squad, because, as I feel, Suicide Squad 4 out of 10 at best. I'm going to just leave it at that. So what's your opinion on the Suicide Squad? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What elements did you enjoy, and what elements did you not enjoy? And do you agree with my review? Do you think I was too harsh on it, or was I right about it? Really, just comment and just tell me how you feel about the movie. And thank you for watching, and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see.